Yeah, okay. If teenagers were fully discipled before high school graduation, churches will be more matured. This means church will not only focus on the number of attendance, but also try to care for souls, hearts, and concerns of people. This leads people feel more comfortable and welcomed by the church. And this will attract the people who do not know Jesus Christ. Last Sunday, I met a newcomer of the church in the church, and he is so nice and noble character. However, he has a negative image in Christians because he met some Christians who confess their faith in Christ Jesus. But when the Christians lied and deceived others, he said that he uh, do not know the power of confess of their faith in Christ Jesus. And I realized that although the confess of faith in Jesus is very important, but if their faith is not matured, they could not bear fruit in their life.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. Um, I so for I guess the way I would see that is you would have more students involved and not leaving the church. I know that I personally speaking from the youth group that I was in, it was about 25 of us. And I mean, I'm not like, I mean, I know this is not the youth pastor's fault because I feel like we had a good discipleship group, like, and a good, we met weekly and, we had people who were walking alongside of us, but out of the 25, there was probably only like 5 or 10 of us that continued to serve in the church. And so I think, having a like, I mean, I think that's a good number, like, right, 5 to 10 out of 25 of us. But I think it could be more if um, you start like from the children's church, like, and start from there. And as they're transitioning from middle school to high school, is making it, I guess, making it more known to them, like what it means to be discipled, because this is something that I've realized is, and Dr. Ross has said this, is like they come from children's church where everything's like, oh, like I always like make or say a joke about this, but like, they'll come from like these cool Bible picture stories, and then come into the youth room and we're talking about like their gender or identity, and it's almost like they're not really grasping what's going on. And I think we've said this in class before, but just partnering with the children's minister and the youth minister, having like a partnership would help a lot. And if we would be able to see like this, these students being discipled as they go along, and possibly seeing them become a worship pastor, or a student pastor, not if it's just not at that church but at another church, or even become elders in the church at some point in their lives.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what you're saying there, Eddie. And I mean, the way I kind of see it, I kind of think that if we were to see students be fully discipled by the time that they were out of high school, like you said, I think we would see a lot less of them falling away from the church. I think we would see a lot less young adults who are leaving the church entirely. I also think that we would see a church full of, obviously, it would be full of more spiritually mature people, but I think as a result of that, it would kind of change the view that non-Christians have of the church, because I feel like so often people outside of the church will see Christians living in a hypocritical manner, and I think that can only boil down to them not being spiritually mature, which ultimately means that they were not discipled fully whenever they first became a Christian. And so I think that it would totally change how the outside world sees the church. And I think ultimately, hopefully, what would happen from that would be that Christianity would be more attractive. There's so many people and so many stories that you hear about of people who've been burned by the church and how well, they saw one person live one way and they don't want to live that way, or whatever it may be. I think it's really interesting. I had a really close friend of mine in high school who he was very he was a different race than me, and you know, in a lot of contexts, races dictate a whole lot in a church setting. Um, they're just wildly different. And he told me one day, you know, I was like, why, you know, what's your deal with church? Why don't you want to go? And he's like, you know, my pastor gets up in pulpit on Sundays and says one thing and then goes out and lives his life a totally different way. And to him, just as a high school student at that point, that had completely turned him off from the church. He didn't want to go because he saw literally his pastor living a hypocritical lifestyle. And so I think that if we had more mature Christians as a whole, I mean, obviously no one's perfect. No church is perfect. No group of believers is perfect. But I think if we saw more fully discipled teenagers leaving the church and leaving the home into the adult world, whether that's college, the workforce, the military, whatever it is, I think that ultimately the church will become a more attractive place, and we'll be able to draw more people to the gospel and more people to Christ.
If teenagers are fully trained before graduation, I think it will be very different from the current other church. First, teenagers can know and take responsibility for their role as Christians without leaving the church even when they get older. Second, teenagers can live as Christians even as others. This means that they can live for Christ's glory, not just for success or money. Finally, it is very helpful in prioritizing. Fully discipline that allows teenagers to learn what is important and who to follow.
Man, so many great answers. I'm not sure how I follow that up. For our context, when I think about teenagers being fully discipled when they graduate, and you know, we live in a rural town, so like half move, half stay here. But I think you would, at least in our context, you wouldn't see the common dip you have in a congregation. At least for us, you know, it's kids up to 18 years old, and there's a massive dip, you know, in the 20s, 30s, borderline mid 30s, maybe 40s, and it comes back up once you get to, you know, age 50 and older. And you know, and we'll have some of like the 30 through 40s, you know, 20 through 40s maybe attend, but they're not really gonna engage as much as they would just be present and just consume on a Sunday morning and then dip out as soon as, you know, service is over. But I think you would see a lot more of even engagement, just kind of to y'all's point. But in turn, you know, there's that old saying, you know, about volunteers, 20% people doing the 80% of the work. Like, and with more engagement across age groups, as they got older, you would see more unified, I guess, in the volunteer space. And even then, if they're fully discipled, that implies that they know how to go and make disciples. I think you see a tremendous multiplication taking place, and that it's really as much less stress on the ministers and other, let's say, lay leaders of the church, and more on, you know, like to the point of, you know, our books we've been reading, like from Robbie Gallaty and such, like of people starting their own discipleship groups and then multiplying from there. And man, just thinking about that, you know, just thinking about what that would even look like, because you would pretty much reverse the rate going on at the Southern Baptist Convention right now, where you have a declining rate of baptisms and a declining rate of church membership, and you would pretty much go in the exact opposite direction at that point, because you would see a generation that would then, I think, have a ripple effect across future generations. You know, you have this generation getting older, they're discipled, next generation getting discipled, to where unfortunately we see a reverse effect of that. You have a generation who doesn't take churches seriously, and then they raise kids that take it even less seriously, right? And so I think discipleship has a tremendous, I mean, you're talking about tidal wave of a shift in the trajectory of just church growth. And because it's not just the lay leaders of the church trying to make disciples, it's the students themselves. And then as they grow into adults, and those adults, them going and making disciples themselves.
Mhm.